The Seattle cruise terminal was a symphony of chaos. Thousands of people buzzed with the frantic, excited energy of an impending vacation. Children chased each other around mountains of designer luggage. Couples took selfies with the massive white hull of the oceanic majesty towering behind the glass windows, and the smell of expensive coffee mixed with the faint metallic tang of the sea. I stood in the middle of it all, a 65-year-old retired nurse from Ohio, feeling entirely invisible. My hands, spotted with age and worn from 40 years of drawing blood and adjusting IV drips, trembled slightly as I held the glossy boarding pass. The paper felt heavy, heavier than it should have. I adjusted my glasses, thinking perhaps the dim terminal lighting was playing tricks on my eyes, but the ink remained unchanged. Evelyn Parker, Deck 2, Cabin 204. I knew Deck 2. I had spent months planning this Alaskan cruise, studying the ship's deck plans late at night at my kitchen table. Deck 2 was the lowest passenger level. It was the windowless interior cabins nestled right above the engine rooms, where the gentle rumble of the ship's mechanics was a constant companion. I looked at the receipts folded in my purse. $25,000. That was the wire transfer I had sent to my daughter, Sarah, 6 months ago. She had offered to handle the bookings, insisting that she knew a luxury travel agent who could get us the trip of a lifetime to celebrate my 65th birthday and the 5-year anniversary of my husband Thomas's passing. I had paid for everything: the flights from Chicago, the premium drink packages, the shore excursions in Juneau, and what was supposed to be a block of adjoining ocean view balcony suites on Deck 9. Yet here I was, holding a ticket for the ship's basement. I stepped out of the flow of foot traffic, pulling my modest navy suitcase to the side of a massive concrete pillar. A cold knot began to form in my stomach, a familiar sinking feeling that I had spent the last 5 years desperately trying to ignore. "Family is everything, Evie," Thomas used to say. His voice, warm and gravelly, echoed in my memory. He had been a high school principal, a man of steadfast routine and quiet dignity. We had lived carefully, saving every extra penny, clipping coupons, taking driving vacations instead of flying. We built a comfortable nest egg, intending to leave a legacy for our only child, Sarah, and our 2 beautiful grandchildren, Chloe and Noah. When Thomas died suddenly of a massive heart attack 5 years ago, my world collapsed. The silence in our Ohio home became deafening. In my grief, Sarah became my anchor, or so I thought. The requests hadn't started as demands. They began as soft, tearful confessions over the phone. I vividly remembered the first one. It was a rainy Tuesday, barely 6 months after Thomas's funeral. Sarah had called, her voice tight with suppressed panic. She and her husband Arthur lived in a sprawling, pristine neighborhood in a wealthy Chicago suburb. Arthur was a sales director, a man whose smile always seemed a little too rehearsed, his handshakes a little too firm. "Mom," she had sobbed, "I didn't want to worry you, but the contractor just left. The roof is completely compromised. If we don't fix it before the winter storms, the water damage will ruin the girls' bedrooms. Arthur's bonus doesn't come through until March, and we're drowning right now." My heart had ached for her. What kind of mother sits on a comfortable retirement fund while her daughter cries over a leaking roof? Thomas and I had saved for emergencies, and this was an emergency. "Don't cry, sweetheart," I had told her, gripping the phone receiver. "How much do you need?" $15,000. I transferred it the next morning. Sarah had promised, with heartfelt gratitude, to pay it back the moment Arthur's bonus cleared. March came and went. The money was never mentioned again. Instead, Sarah sent me a beautiful bouquet of lilies for Mother's Day and a framed photo of the kids standing in front of the house. The roof looked perfect. I told myself that seeing my grandchildren safe and warm was repayment enough, but the dam had broken. The precedent was set. A year later, it was Chloe's education. "Mom, the public middle school here is just terrible. The bullying is out of control, and Chloe's anxiety is skyrocketing. There's a spot open at the Oakwood Academy, but the tuition is due up front. It's $30,000. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't for Chloe's mental health. How could I say no to my granddaughter's well-being? I imagined Chloe, sensitive and sweet, crying in a school bathroom. The image was unbearable. I visited the bank the next day. The teller, a kind woman named Martha, who knew Thomas well, had given me a gentle, questioning look when I authorized the withdrawal, but I ignored it. I was being a good grandmother. I was doing what Thomas would have wanted. Then came Arthur's career crisis. 2 years ago, Sarah had flown down to Ohio by herself, sitting at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, her designer nails perfectly manicured. "Arthur's up for a massive promotion to regional vice president, Mom," she had explained, leaning in conspiratorially. "But you know how his industry is. It's all about optics. His boss literally told him he needs to project more executive presence. His old sedan is embarrassing him in front of clients. If he gets this promotion, our financial worries are over forever. We just need a bridge loan to help him get the Lexus SUV. It's an investment in our family's future." $45,000. I remember staring at my hands that day. I had worn the same winter coat for 7 years. I still bought generic brand coffee to save a few dollars a week. But my daughter was looking at me with those wide, desperate eyes, treating me like the savior of their family. The word loan was used heavily during that conversation. "Of course, Sarah," I had said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you need." I never saw a dime of that money back. Arthur got the promotion, but their lifestyle simply inflated to consume the new income. There were country club dues, expensive summer camps for Noah, organic meal delivery services, and winter ski trips to Vail. Whenever I gently asked about the loans, Sarah would become instantly defensive, her tone shifting from the loving daughter to the stressed, burdened mother. "Mom, are you really keeping score? I thought family helped family. Arthur is under so much pressure right now. Do you want me to give him another ulcer by bringing up money?" The guilt trip was a masterclass. I would back down, apologizing for adding to her stress, feeling selfish for even asking about the funds Thomas and I had spent a lifetime accumulating. I convinced myself that this was simply the modern reality of parenting. The world was harder now. I was blessed to be able to help. But standing here in the cruise terminal, holding the Deck 2 boarding pass, the carefully constructed illusions I had built over the last 5 years were crumbling into dust. A sudden burst of laughter pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up. There they were. Sarah was gliding through the premium priority lane, pushing a sleek silver luggage cart. She looked immaculate. She wore a tailored linen blazer, wide-leg silk trousers, and oversized sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted blonde hair. Arthur was beside her, looking tan and relaxed in a crisp polo shirt, tapping away on the latest smartphone. Noah, now 10, was playing a game on an iPad while 15-year-old Chloe trailed behind, her headphones over her ears, looking around the terminal with a bored expression. They looked like the picture-perfect wealthy American family. A family funded by the widow standing by the concrete pillar in her practical orthopedic shoes and a sweater she bought on sale at Macy's. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and walked toward them. "Sarah!" I called out, waving my hand. Sarah turned. For a fraction of a second, before the public mask slipped firmly into place, I saw a flash of profound irritation cross her face. It was the look you give a telemarketer who interrupts your dinner, but it vanished instantly, replaced by a wide, brilliant smile. "Mom!" She abandoned the cart and walked over, giving me a quick, performative hug that smelled of expensive floral perfume and hairspray. She didn't squeeze. It was a hug designed not to wrinkle her linen blazer. "You made it! How was the flight from Columbus?" "It was fine," I said, my throat feeling dry. Arthur offered a brief wave from the cart, but didn't walk over. He was already talking to someone on his phone. I looked down at the paper in my hand. "Sarah, there seems to be a mistake with my ticket." Sarah's smile tightened at the edges. She glanced around the terminal quickly, as if making sure no one was listening, then stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "Oh, Mom, I am so sorry about that," she said, her tone dripping with an exaggerated, breathy sympathy. "It's been an absolute nightmare. The cruise line overbooked the ship. Can you believe it? They called me last week and said they had to downgrade a bunch of reservations because of some VIP corporate buyout." I stared at her. "They downgraded my ticket? To an interior cabin in the basement?" "I know, it's horrible." Sarah sighed heavily, placing a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. "I fought with them for hours on the phone, Mom. I really did. I yelled at the manager. But they said because your ticket was a single-occupancy senior fare, it was the first on the list to be bumped." A single-occupancy senior fare. "But I paid $25,000, Sarah," I said, my voice trembling, though not from age this time. "I paid for a block of adjoining suites. That's what you told me we were getting." Sarah's eyes darted toward Arthur, who was now motioning for her to hurry up. Her voice lost a fraction of its sweetness, taking on that familiar, slightly patronizing edge she used when I couldn't figure out how to use the streaming service on my television. "Mom, please don't make a scene," she whispered. "I managed to save our family suite, thank God. Otherwise, the whole trip would have been ruined for the kids. They compensated us for the downgrade with some onboard credit. I'll make sure you get a couple of free massages at the spa, okay? It's basically just a room to sleep in anyway. We'll be out by the pool all day." She was lying. It wasn't just a suspicion. It was a deep maternal intuition that hit me like a physical blow. The absolute ease with which the lie rolled off her tongue terrified me. "If the ship is overbooked," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even, "why didn't they downgrade you and Arthur? You're younger. The kids could have taken the interior room." Sarah let out a short, incredulous laugh, as if I had just suggested we swim to Alaska. "Mom, be reasonable. Arthur has claustrophobia. He can't sleep without a window. Plus, he's been working 80-hour weeks. He needs the suite to decompress. You're retired. You don't have the kind of stress he does." Before I could respond, Arthur finally walked over. He checked his gold watch, a watch I suspected my money had helped purchase. "Everything good here, Evelyn?" he asked, flashing his signature salesman smile. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to get moving. The VIP boarding lounge is going to close soon." "VIP boarding?" I asked. My ticket clearly stated Zone 6, General Boarding. Arthur clapped his hands together, rubbing them briskly. "Yeah, the suite comes with access to the concierge lounge. Free champagne while we wait. It's fantastic." He looked at my ticket. "Ah, Zone 6. You'll probably be boarding with the main crowd in about an hour. Why don't you grab a coffee? We'll see you on board." He was dismissing me. My own son-in-law was dismissing me to the waiting room while he drank champagne on my dime. "Actually," Sarah chimed in, suddenly looking a bit nervous. She stepped between me and Arthur. "Mom, about being on board." I looked at my daughter, the little girl who used to beg me to read her one more bedtime story, the teenager whose hair I held back when she had the stomach flu. "What is it, Sarah?" She adjusted her sunglasses, refusing to meet my eyes directly. "So Arthur actually ran into a couple of his major clients at the airport. Total coincidence. They're on this sailing too, staying in the penthouse block right next to our suite." "And?" Sarah sighed, clearly annoyed that she had to spell it out. "And it's a big networking opportunity for him. We're probably going to be hosting them for drinks in our suite a few evenings. So, it might be best if you don't come up to Deck 9 without texting me first." The terminal noise seemed to fade away, leaving a ringing silence in my ears. "You don't want me coming to your room?" I asked. "It's not that, Mom. God, don't be so dramatic," Sarah snapped, her patience entirely gone. "It's just, these are high net worth people. They're very image conscious. And you, well, you packed your gardening sneakers and those fleece vests you love so much. It's just a different vibe. I don't want Arthur to feel embarrassed or have to explain things. You understand, right? You want him to succeed." "I don't want Arthur to feel embarrassed." The words echoed in the hollow space in my chest. She wasn't just stealing my money. She was ashamed of me. I was good enough to write the checks, good enough to drain my life savings to fund their facade. But I wasn't good enough to stand in the same room as the people they were trying to impress. I was a financial resource, and an embarrassing one at that. A hot, prickly sensation started at the back of my neck. It wasn't the familiar, crushing guilt that Sarah usually managed to induce. It wasn't the deep, mourning sadness I had carried since Thomas died. It was rage. Pure, crystalline, unadulterated rage. It was a feeling so foreign to me that for a moment it stole my breath. I had spent my entire life being accommodating. As a nurse, my job was to soothe, to yield, to make others comfortable. As a mother and a wife, I had always put myself last. I had equated self-sacrifice with love. But looking at Sarah's annoyed, impatient face, the fog of 5 years of manipulation instantly evaporated. "Right," I heard myself say. My voice sounded remarkably calm. Hollow, but calm. "I wouldn't want to embarrass Arthur." Sarah visibly relaxed, letting out a breath. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. I knew you'd understand. Look, we really have to run. The kids are getting restless. Text me when you get to your cabin, and maybe we can meet up for the buffet dinner tomorrow, okay?" She gave me another air kiss. Arthur offered a brief nod, and they turned away, disappearing into the exclusive priority boarding lane. I didn't say goodbye to my grandchildren. I couldn't. I stood there for a long time, watching the spot where they had vanished. The crowd continued to mill around me, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered my world. When my boarding zone was finally called an hour later, I joined the massive, shuffling line of general passengers. We moved slowly up the gangway, herded like cattle toward the lower decks. Finding cabin 204 took 20 minutes of navigating narrow, confusing corridors that smelled strongly of industrial cleaning supplies and diesel fuel. When I swiped my keycard and opened the heavy metal door, the reality of my situation hit me. The room was no larger than a walk-in closet. There was a narrow twin bed, a tiny desk, and a bathroom where you could touch all four walls at once. Above the bed, a dull, rattling sound reverberated from the ceiling, the ship's massive engines warming up. There was no window, no natural light, just four walls closing in on me. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, leaving my suitcase by the door. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't open Sarah's text thread. I didn't look at the photos of my grandchildren. Instead, I opened my banking app. It took a few moments for the spotty cellular connection to load. When the screen finally populated, I stared at the numbers. My primary checking account, my savings account, and the joint credit card account I had opened for Sarah 3 years ago, just for emergencies. I clicked on the credit card statement. The balance was currently sitting at $12,000. The recent charges made my stomach turn. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, the Ritz-Carlton Spa in Chicago, a high-end golf outfitter. I had been funding a fantasy. I had allowed my grief and my desperate desire to keep my family close to turn me into a willing victim. I had betrayed Thomas's hard work, and worse, I had betrayed myself. I laid back on the small bed, staring at the low metal ceiling. The engines rumbled louder as the massive ship prepared to detach from the dock. We were leaving land. We were embarking on a 7-day journey into the frozen wilderness of Alaska. Sarah thought she had me trapped. She thought she could take my money, hide me in the basement, and trot me out for the buffet line when it was convenient for her conscience. She thought I was just a tired, sad old woman who would swallow the disrespect because I was too afraid to be alone. She was wrong. The woman who had written those checks was dead. The mother who had made endless excuses for her daughter's selfishness had been left behind in the terminal. As the ship sounded its massive horn, vibrating through the steel walls of cabin 204, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg for their attention. And I certainly wasn't going to stay in the shadows while they lived like royalty on my dime. I sat up, reached into my purse, and pulled out my glasses. It was time to look very closely at exactly what kind of game my daughter was playing. And more importantly, it was time to decide how I was going to end it. The constant, low-frequency hum of the ship's massive diesel engines made the cheap metal hangers in my closet vibrate throughout the night. I didn't sleep much. In the pitch-black, windowless confinement of cabin 204, it was impossible to tell when morning finally arrived. I only knew it was time to get up when my digital watch flashed 7 a.m. I took a shower in a bathroom so small I bumped my elbows against the plastic walls every time I turned around. As I dressed in my sensible khakis and a warm fleece sweater, I looked at myself in the narrow mirror over the sink. The woman looking back seemed older than she had yesterday. The soft, accommodating grandmother had been left on the dock in Seattle. The woman in the mirror had a tight jaw and eyes that felt painfully wide open. I left the claustrophobic hallway of Deck 2 and took the elevator up. I bypassed the crowded buffet on Deck 10 and walked out onto the open promenade on Deck 9, the deck where my suite was supposed to be. The contrast was staggering. The air out here was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of the northern Pacific. The deck was lined with teakwood loungers with plush cushions. Stewards in crisp white uniforms quietly arranged rolled towels. I walked past the row of penthouse suites. The heavy mahogany doors practically radiated exclusivity. I calculated the distance. Sarah's suite was just 3 doors down from where her husband's important clients were reportedly staying. I didn't knock. I didn't text her. I just kept walking until I found the solarium, a glass-enclosed, adults-only sanctuary at the front of the ship. It was early enough that the area was mostly empty. I found a secluded alcove partially hidden by a row of large, potted palm trees and settled into a cushioned wicker chair with a cup of black coffee, a book resting unopened on my lap. I was just starting to find a sliver of peace when I heard the unmistakable sharp, confident click of designer heels on the tile floor. I shrank back slightly behind the broad leaves of the palm. Through the fronds, I saw Sarah. She was wearing a sheer designer cover-up over a swimsuit that probably cost more than my first car, holding her phone to her ear. She dropped her beach tote onto a lounger just a few feet on the other side of my leafy partition and stretched out, completely unaware of my presence. "Jess, you wouldn't believe this ship," Sarah laughed into the phone. Her voice was loud, carrying easily in the quiet solarium. "It's absolute heaven. The suite is bigger than our first apartment." A pause as she listened to her friend. "Oh, Mom? Yeah, she's fine. She's somewhere in the bowels of the ship." Sarah let out a dramatic sigh. "Honestly, Jess, I had to do it. The travel agent called last month and said the only way to get the owner's suite next to the Davises, Arthur's clients, was to upgrade, and it was a $15,000 difference. I wasn't going to put that on our cards. Arthur would have a stroke. So I just moved Mom to a guaranteed interior cabin. They refunded the difference to the travel account, and boom, we got the suite." My fingers tightened around my coffee cup until my knuckles turned stark white. The ceramic felt like it might shatter. "No, are you kidding?" Sarah scoffed at whatever her friend said. "She has no idea. I told her the ship was overbooked and they bumped her. You know, Mom, she never questions anything if you act stressed enough. She just kind of accepts it. Besides, what does she need a balcony for? She just knits and reads those dusty paperback mysteries anyway. She'd be wasting a premium view." A wave of nausea washed over me, so strong I had to close my eyes. It wasn't just the money. It was the absolute casual cruelty of it. She never questions anything. I wasn't a mother to her anymore. I was a mark. I was an easy target. "Anyway, the best part is the onboard credit I got from the refund," Sarah continued, her voice practically buzzing with excitement. "I booked the VIP thermal spa pass for the whole week. And Jess, you should see the boutique on board. They have this diamond tennis bracelet. It's breathtaking. I'm going to tell Arthur he has to buy it for my anniversary next month, but if he whines about the budget, I might just use Mom's emergency card. She won't check the statement until we get back to Ohio anyway. It's basically an advance on my inheritance, right? Might as well enjoy it while I'm young." I didn't stay to hear the rest. Moving with a quiet, careful precision I didn't know I possessed, I slipped out of the wicker chair and walked away, staying behind the line of greenery until I was out of the solarium. I walked blindly for a few minutes, the plush carpet of the luxury decks absorbing the sound of my footsteps. An advance on my inheritance. My life, Thomas's life, are decades of frugal living, of going without, of saving for a rainy day. It was all just a slush fund for a diamond bracelet and a VIP spa pass. I found a quiet alcove near the ship's library, sinking onto a small velvet sofa. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from Sarah. "Mom, hope you slept well. We are swamped today with Arthur's clients, doing a private wine tasting. But don't forget, tonight is Arthur's big 40th birthday dinner at the Crown Grill at 8 p.m. We'll be with the Davises, but swing by the table to say hi. Oh, and the restaurant requires a card on file to hold the reservation. I used the joint emergency card just for the hold, but Arthur's paying for the actual dinner. Promise. Love you." I read the text 3 times. The manipulation was so woven into her language that I marveled at how I had ever missed it. Arthur is paying. Promise. Another lie. She was setting up the board. They would eat like kings with their wealthy clients, run up a massive bill to impress them. And when the check came, oops, Arthur forgot his wallet, or the corporate card was acting up. The emergency card would be charged. I had seen this exact play before, at Chloe's birthday dinner 2 years ago. I looked at the time. It was 11 a.m. I didn't reply to the text. Instead, I connected to the ship's exorbitantly expensive satellite cellular network. I didn't care about the roaming charges. I dialed the toll-free number on the back of my primary debit card. "First National Bank, this is Derek. How can I help you today?" "Hello, Derek. This is Evelyn Parker," I said. My voice was steady, completely devoid of the tremor that usually accompanied my anxiety. "I need to speak to the fraud department or whoever handles immediate account closures." "I can assist you with that, Mrs. Parker. Is everything all right?" "I need to cancel a credit card, the Visa ending in 4409, the one with Sarah Mitchell listed as an authorized user." "Certainly, ma'am. Let me pull up the account. I can put a temporary freeze on it right now if you suspect compromised activity. No, Derek, I said, my tone absolute. Not a freeze. I want the account closed, permanently. I want the card deactivated this very second. Any charges attempted after this moment must be declined. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on the other end. All right, Mrs. Parker. Before I finalize the closure, I do see a pending pre-authorization from earlier this morning for Oceanic Majesty the Crown Grill in the amount of $500. Do you want to dispute that? $500 just to hold the table. Let the hold drop, I instructed. But close the account. Ensure that no final charges can be pushed through. Understood. The account ending in 4409 is now officially closed. The card will no longer function for any transactions, holds, or purchases. Thank you, Derek. I hung up the phone. For the first time since boarding this floating palace, I took a deep, full breath. My chest, which had felt tight and constricted for 5 years, suddenly felt remarkably light. The bleeding had stopped. The rest of the day, I actually enjoyed the cruise. I found a quiet, hidden deck chair at the back of the ship and read my dusty paperback mystery. I ate a sensible lunch at the buffet, enjoying a plate of fresh salmon and a quiet conversation with a retired schoolteacher from Oregon. I did not text Sarah. I did not look for them. I let the hours drift by, feeling a strange electric anticipation building in my veins. By 7:30 p.m., I went back to cabin 204. I changed out of my fleece sweater and put on a crisp white blouse and a modest, elegant black skirt. I applied a touch of lipstick. I looked in the mirror again. I didn't look like an ATM anymore. I looked like a woman who was in control. At 8:15 p.m., I took the elevator to Deck 7. The Crown Grill was the ship's premier specialty dining venue. It was a masterpiece of dark mahogany, brass fittings, and low amber lighting. An adjacent cocktail lounge, separated from the main dining floor by a waist-high wall of frosted glass and decorative metalwork, offered a perfect vantage point. I walked into the lounge, asked the hostess for a small table near the partition, and sat down. Through the frosted glass, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the center of the restaurant. It wasn't hard to spot them. Arthur and Sarah were holding court at a large, round booth directly in the middle of the room. Sarah looked stunning in a backless emerald green cocktail dress. Arthur was in a custom-tailored tuxedo jacket. Sitting across from them was another couple, the Davises, presumably. They looked wealthy, bored, and demanding. I watched the performance unfold over the next 2 hours. It was a masterclass in aggressive social climbing. Arthur laughed too loudly at Mr. Davis's jokes. Sarah fawned over Mrs. Davis's jewelry. I watched as the sommelier brought out bottle after bottle of wine, presenting the labels to Arthur with a slight bow. Even from a distance, I recognized the distinct label of a vintage Chateau Margaux, a wine that easily cost over $1,000 a bottle in a restaurant like this. They drank 3 of them. Then came the seafood towers, the dry-aged Wagyu steaks, the flaming desserts prepared tableside. It was a feast fit for an emperor, fueled entirely by the arrogance of a man who believed someone else was footing the bill. At 10:30 p.m., the plates were cleared. Mr. Davis leaned back, patting his stomach, looking thoroughly impressed. Arthur signaled the waiter with a snap of his fingers, a gesture that made me cringe. The waiter arrived with a sleek black leather folder containing the bill. I leaned slightly closer to the glass partition. Arthur didn't even look at the check. He gave a magnanimous wave of his hand, playing the perfect host, and Sarah, right on cue, reached into her sequined clutch. She pulled out the silver First National Bank Visa card, my card, and placed it casually on top of the receipt. The waiter nodded, took the folder, and walked away toward the serving station. I flagged down a waitress in the cocktail lounge. "Excuse me," I said, my voice smooth. "I'd like to order a drink." "Of course, ma'am. What can I get for you?" "A gin martini. Very dry. 3 olives, please." As the waitress walked away, I turned my attention back to the dining room. The restaurant manager, a tall man with a severe European face, was whispering frantically to the waiter who had taken Sarah's card. The manager looked at the computer screen, then looked over at Arthur's table. It was happening. The manager approached the booth. He leaned down, whispering discreetly near Arthur's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was deafening. Arthur's smug, relaxed posture instantly rigidified. He frowned, shaking his head, and gestured toward Sarah. Sarah smiled, a little confused, and looked up at the manager. The manager spoke again, his face a mask of professional apology, and placed the black leather folder back on the table. He opened it, revealing the silver card and a small white slip of paper. Even from 20 feet away, I saw the blood drain from Sarah's face. The deep tan she had acquired that morning seemed to vanish, leaving her pale and drawn. She picked up the card, her hands visibly shaking. She looked at Arthur. Arthur's face was rapidly turning an angry shade of puce. He forced a strained, tight smile for the Davises, who were now watching the exchange with thinly veiled curiosity and growing awkwardness. Arthur leaned in, hissing something at Sarah. Sarah frantically grabbed her clutch, digging through it, pulling out a handful of other credit cards. She handed 2 to the manager. The manager walked away. My martini arrived. The glass was perfectly chilled, condensation beading on the elegant stem. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The gin burned cleanly down my throat. 2 minutes later, the manager returned. He shook his head again. He placed the 2 cards back on the table. Whatever credit limits Arthur and Sarah had on their own cards, a $4,000 dinner had clearly blown past them. Their house of cards was collapsing in real time, right in the middle of the most expensive restaurant on the ocean. Arthur was no longer smiling. He looked furious, humiliated, trapped. He glared at Sarah with a look of pure venom. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. She pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. My phone vibrated in my purse. I didn't answer it. I didn't even take it out. I just let it buzz against the fabric of my bag. Down at the table, the situation was degrading rapidly. Mr. Davis, clearly uncomfortable with the incredibly gauche display of financial insecurity, slowly reached for his own wallet. Arthur held up his hands, desperately trying to stop him, his face a mask of mortification, but Mr. Davis handed a sleek black American Express card to the manager. The damage was done. The illusion was shattered. Arthur Mitchell, the big-shot executive, had just been bailed out on his own birthday dinner by the client he was trying to impress. The professional humiliation was absolute. They left the restaurant shortly after, walking stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the Davises. As Sarah passed the glass partition of the cocktail lounge, she looked utterly destroyed. Her mascara was slightly smudged. Her designer dress suddenly looked ridiculous on her slumping frame. She never even glanced into the dim lounge. She never saw me sitting there. I sat in the quiet glow of the bar for another 20 minutes. I finished my martini, savoring the salty tang of the olives. I paid my modest bar tab with cash, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. As I stood up to walk back to deck 2, I caught my reflection in the dark, polished wood of the bar. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I didn't look like a sad widow in the basement. I looked like a woman who was just getting started. The rest of the Alaskan cruise was an exercise in absolute glacial silence. If Sarah and Arthur saw me on the ship, they abruptly turned and walked in the opposite direction. There were no more invitations to dinner, no forced, smiling selfies on the deck, and no further requests for money. The sudden severing of our false closeness hurt less than I expected. Mostly it felt like a massive, suffocating weight had been lifted from my chest. When the ship finally docked back in Seattle, I disembarked alone, took a taxi to the airport, and flew home to Ohio. Walking through the front door of my house, the silence greeted me like an old friend. The familiar scent of lemon polish and Thomas's old pipe tobacco, which somehow still lingered in the drapes, grounded me. This house was my sanctuary. It was paid off. It was safe. But as I set my suitcase down in the hallway, I knew that the illusion of safety wasn't enough anymore. I made a pot of black tea, carried it to the large oak dining table, and went to work. I spent the next 3 days pulling every financial record I possessed. I dragged heavy plastic file boxes up from the basement. I logged into every online banking portal. I printed out 5 years' worth of credit card statements, bank transfers, and canceled checks. I bought a pack of bright yellow highlighters and a large legal pad. I went through every single line item since the day Thomas died. The physical act of highlighting the numbers forced me to confront the sheer scale of my own blindness. The $15,000 for the roof, the $30,000 for Oakwood Academy, the $45,000 for the Lexus SUV. But it was the smaller, insidious charges that made my stomach churn the most. $500 here for a weekend getaway. $800 there for emergency dental work that coincided perfectly with a luxury spa charge on the joint card. When I finally tallied the bottom line, the number stared back at me, stark and undeniable. $187,450. Nearly $200,000 of the nest egg Thomas and I had built through decades of clipping coupons, driving used cars, and skipping vacations. Gone. Vaporized into the ether of Arthur's ego and Sarah's desperate need to keep up appearances. On the fourth afternoon, exhausted and sick to my stomach, I went into Thomas's old study to look for our 2021 tax returns. The room had remained largely untouched since he passed. His heavy mahogany desk still sat in the center, facing the window overlooking the backyard. I sat in his leather chair, pulling open the heavy side drawers. In the very bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old warranties and appliance manuals, my hand brushed against something hard and wrapped in a soft velvet cloth. I pulled it out. It was a heavy, brass-cornered ledger. I frowned, tracing the embossed leather cover. Thomas had always been meticulous with his record-keeping, but I had never seen this book before. The brass clasp was locked, but I knew my husband. I reached under the middle desk drawer, feeling for the small piece of tape where he always hid his spare keys. It was still there. The tiny key turned with a satisfying click. I opened the ledger. The first page was dated 6 months before he died. Seeing his neat, blocky handwriting again brought a sudden, violent sting of tears to my eyes. Evie, the first line read, "If you are reading this, my heart finally gave out on me, and you are sitting in my chair trying to make sense of the paperwork. I am so sorry to leave you." I touched the ink, my breath catching in my throat. "I need to tell you something I couldn't bring myself to say out loud." The letter continued. "I love Sarah with all my heart. She is our daughter. But I see her clearly, Evie, and I see the man she married. Arthur is a man who builds his house on someone else's sand. He is reckless, he is vain, and he is driven by a deep, hollow insecurity that no amount of money will ever fill. And Sarah loves him enough to be blind to it. Or perhaps she just lacks the spine to stop him." I gasped, a hand flying to my mouth. Thomas had known. Even 5 years ago, he had seen exactly what Arthur was. "When I am gone, they will come to you," Thomas wrote. "They will have emergencies. They will have crises. They will use the grandchildren. Evie, your heart is too big, and your guilt over surviving me will make you vulnerable. So I took steps to protect you from your own generosity." I turned the page with trembling fingers. Taped to the heavy paper was a certificate for a whole life insurance policy. The provider was a small private firm out of state, a name I didn't recognize. "I funded this policy over the last 20 years with my annual bonuses," the ledger read. "It is worth $500,000. The payout is structured to go directly into a private account solely in your name. Sarah is not a beneficiary. Sarah does not know this exists. I explicitly instructed the broker to only contact you upon my death and to send the paperwork to a P.O. box I opened in your name. The key is taped to the back of this book." I flipped the book over. There, under a strip of clear packing tape, was a small brass post office key. "Do not tell Sarah about this money, Evie," the final paragraph commanded, the handwriting pressing deep into the paper. "I forbid it. If she knows it exists, Arthur will find a way to bleed you dry to fix his mistakes. This is your armor. This is your security. Use it to live beautifully. I love you." I sat in the quiet study and wept. I wept for the man I had lost, a man who had loved me enough to see my weaknesses and shield me from beyond the grave. And I wept with a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. I wasn't ruined. Thomas had caught me before I could hit the ground. The shrill ringing of the house phone shattered the quiet. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and walked into the kitchen to answer it. The caller ID flashed a Chicago area code. It was Sarah. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. "Hello?" "Mom!" Sarah's voice was pitched high, tight with an anxiety bordering on hysteria. "Finally! I've been calling your cell phone for 2 days." "My cell phone has been off, Sarah," I said smoothly. "Mom, you need to call the bank right now," she rushed on, ignoring me. "There's something wrong with the joint card. Arthur tried to use it to pay for our flights home from Seattle, and it was declined. And then the auto draft for Chloe's braces bounced this morning. The bank says the account is closed. You need to authorize them to reopen it immediately." "The bank didn't make a mistake, Sarah," I said. "I closed the account." Dead silence on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, the frantic energy was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "What do you mean you closed it?" "I mean exactly that. I closed the credit card. I will not be reopening it." Mom, you can't do that, she exploded. We have things tied to that card. We rely on that for our cash flow. You completely humiliated Arthur on the ship and now you're sabotaging our finances? Your finances, Sarah, not mine. You and Arthur make nearly $300,000 a year. You don't need my retirement money for your cash flow. There was a muffled sound on the other end, like a hand being placed over the receiver, followed by hushed, angry whispering. Then the line clicked. Evelyn, it was Arthur. His voice was dangerously low, stripped of all the fake salesman charm. What game are you playing? No game, Arthur. I'm just organizing my affairs. Listen to me very carefully, Arthur said, his tone adopting a slow, patronizing cadence, like he was speaking to a misbehaving toddler. We were willing to overlook your little tantrum on the cruise. We know the anniversary of Thomas's death makes you emotional, but this erratic behavior, it's concerning, Evelyn. Erratic? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Yes, erratic, Arthur pressed. Closing accounts without warning, disappearing on the ship, hoarding your money while your grandchildren need things. Sarah and I have been talking. You're 65. You're living alone in that big house. You're clearly confused and making impulsive, destructive decisions. A cold, icy terror began to spread through my veins. I recognized the tactic. It wasn't just anger, it was a strategy. I am perfectly lucid, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Are you? He countered smoothly. Because to an outside observer, it looks like cognitive decline, paranoia, irrationally turning on your own family. If you don't call the bank and fix this, Evelyn, Sarah, and I are going to have to step in. We love you too much to let you ruin yourself. We might need to look into a medical power of attorney, a conservatorship, just until you're evaluated and stabilized. My breath hitched. They were threatening to declare me incompetent. They wanted to take legal control of my life, my house, and my bank accounts, simply because I had turned off the tap. Don't you ever threaten me, I whispered fiercely. It's not a threat, Evelyn, it's love, Arthur said, his voice dripping with poisonous concern. We'll be coming down to Ohio next weekend to check on you. Think very carefully about how you want to handle this. See you soon. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the phone onto the counter. I felt like a cornered animal. Arthur was a corporate shark. He knew how to manipulate systems. If they hired a ruthless lawyer, if they brought a doctor to my door, could they actually do it? Could they lock me away in a facility and drain everything Thomas and I had built? I didn't sleep that night. I paced the floorboards, Thomas's ledger clutched to my chest. By Thursday morning, I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and black coffee. I had my weekly watercolor class at the local community center. I considered skipping it, but the thought of sitting in the silent house waiting for Arthur to strike was unbearable. I drove to the center and set up my easel in the back of the bright, sunlit room. I tried to focus on the still life arrangement of apples and sunflowers, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My brushstrokes were erratic, muddying the colors into a gray, ugly mess. You're murdering those poor apples, Evelyn. I jumped. The woman at the easel next to me was looking over her reading glasses. Margaret Hayes was a woman in her early 70s, with a shock of elegant silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and posture so perfect it looked painful. She always wore tailored blazers to a messy art class, and she had a dry, wicked sense of humor. We usually chatted about gardening or the terrible coffee in the lobby, but today her sharp blue eyes were intensely focused on my face. I'm sorry, I mumbled, putting the brush down. I have a lot on my mind. Margaret didn't return to her canvas. She slowly wiped her hands on a rag, stepped over, and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. You look like you haven't slept in a week. You look hunted, she said softly. Whatever is chasing you, Evelyn, it's not going to be solved by destroying a piece of cold-pressed paper. Let's go get some real coffee. My treat. I don't know why I agreed. Perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion, or perhaps it was the commanding maternal authority in Margaret's voice. We walked to a quiet diner 2 blocks away and sat in a vinyl booth. Margaret ordered 2 black coffees and a slice of cherry pie with 2 forks. She didn't press me. She just waited, sipping her coffee, her intelligent eyes watching me with patient calculation. And then, I broke. I didn't mean to, but the dam simply gave way. I told her everything. I told her about the $187,000. I told her about the humiliation on the cruise ship. I told her about Thomas's secret ledger. And finally, fighting back tears of genuine terror, I told her about Arthur's phone call. The threat of the psychiatric evaluation. The threat of conservatorship. "They're coming next weekend," I whispered, burying my face in my hands. "I don't know what to do. He's so arrogant, Margaret. He sounded so sure of himself. If they take my house, if they tell a judge I'm crazy." Margaret didn't offer a platitude. She didn't pat my hand and tell me everything would be fine. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate bite of her cherry pie. Then she leaned across the table, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. It was a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Evelyn, my dear," Margaret said, her voice dropping into a register of pure, unadulterated command. "Do you know what I did for a living before I retired to paint terrible watercolors and grow hydrangeas?" I shook my head, wiping my eyes. "You said you worked for the county." "I did," Margaret said, her blue eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "For 25 years, I sat on the bench of the Cuyahoga County Probate Court. I was the presiding judge over estate disputes, elder abuse, and conservatorship hearings." I stared at her, my mouth slightly open. "I have seen hundreds of greedy, entitled little parasites exactly like your son-in-law," Margaret continued, her tone sharpening into a blade. "I ate men like Arthur Mitchell for breakfast. They bank on the fact that older women are too polite, too ashamed, and too ignorant of the law to fight back." "Can they do it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Can he take my money?" "Not while I have breath in my lungs," Margaret stated flatly. "Your son-in-law is playing a game of intimidation. To get a conservatorship, they have to prove severe cognitive decline to a judge. But they are banking on surprising you. They want to corner you, rattle you, and get you to sign a power of attorney under duress. We are not going to let that happen." Margaret reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek silver pen and a small notepad. "You don't need to be afraid, Evelyn. You need armor, and I know exactly where to buy it." She scribbled a name and a phone number on the paper. "This is David Vance. He was the most ruthless, brilliant estate litigator that ever argued in my courtroom. He is a bulldog in a bespoke suit. I am going to call him right now, and we are going to his office at 2 o'clock this afternoon." "What are we going to do?" I asked, looking at the paper as if it were a life raft. "We are going to build a fortress," Margaret smiled grimly. "We are going to set up an irrevocable living trust. We are going to transfer your house, your bank accounts, and Thomas's secret $500,000 into that trust. We are going to make it legally impossible for Sarah or Arthur to touch a single copper penny you own. And then—" Margaret tapped her silver pen against the table. "Then, when they show up next weekend expecting to bully a confused old widow, we are going to hand them a legal reality check that will make their heads spin." For the first time since Arthur had hung up the phone, the icy terror in my chest began to melt. In its place, a new, fiery resolve took hold. I looked at the retired judge sitting across from me, and for the first time in 5 years, I truly believed I was going to be okay. "All right, Margaret," I said, sitting up straight. "Let's go buy some armor." David Vance's office did not look like a place where emotions were coddled. Located on the top floor of a sleek glass building in downtown Cleveland, it was a fortress of dark leather, polished walnut, and towering bookshelves filled with thick legal volumes. David himself was a man in his late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and the ruthless, efficient energy of a hunting dog on a fresh scent. When Margaret and I walked into his office, he didn't offer me the patronizing, sad smile I had received from bank tellers and acquaintances since Thomas died. He shook my hand firmly, gestured for us to sit, and immediately pulled out a legal pad. "Judge Hayes gave me the brief on the drive over, Mrs. Parker," David said, his voice crisp. "Let's not waste time. Your son-in-law is setting the stage for a hostile conservatorship. It's a classic playbook. They isolate the target, manufacture a narrative of cognitive decline, and use the probate courts to seize control of the assets." "Can he do it?" I asked, my hands gripping the armrests of the leather chair. "Not if we move faster than he does," David replied, uncapping a fountain pen. "Today we are establishing a revocable living trust. You will be the sole trustee, meaning you maintain absolute control over every penny while you are alive and of sound mind. We will deed your house into the trust. We will move your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and your late husband's life insurance policy into the trust." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "If Arthur tries to petition the court, He won't be suing a lonely widow. He will be going up against a legally fortified entity protected by my firm. I will personally file an injunction so fast it will make his head spin. Furthermore, we are drafting a new medical and financial power of attorney today. You are naming Judge Hayes here as your agent, with myself as the secondary." Margaret offered a grim, satisfied smile from the chair next to me. "They won't have the legal authority to authorize a Band-Aid for you, Evelyn, let alone commit you to a facility," she said. We spent 4 hours in that office. I signed my name so many times my wrist ached. But with every stroke of the pen, I felt the heavy, suffocating chains of the past 5 years falling away. I was taking my life back. I was protecting Thomas's legacy. Before we left, David closed the thick file folder. "There is one more thing, Mrs. Parker. In cases like this, aggressive offense is the best defense. Arthur Mitchell is acting desperate. Men in his income bracket don't usually threaten to lock up their mother-in-law over a closed credit card unless they are facing a severe liquidity crisis. With your permission, I'd like to run a discrete asset and liability check on him. If they plan to walk into a courtroom and claim they are acting in your best financial interest, I want to know exactly what their financial interests look like." "Do it," I said without hesitation. 3 days later, I was in my garden, aggressively pruning the overgrown rose bushes, when my cell phone rang. It was David Vance. "Mrs. Parker, I have the preliminary report on Arthur and Sarah Mitchell," David said. His professional detachment had slipped slightly, replaced by a tone of profound disgust. "Are you sitting down?" I pulled off my gardening gloves and sat on the wooden bench Thomas had built. "I am. What did you find, David?" "It's a house of cards, Evelyn, and it's currently on fire." I could hear him flipping through pages. "Let's start with the primary residence in Chicago. They took out a second mortgage on the property 2 years ago. According to public county records, they are currently 90 days past due on both the primary and the secondary mortgages. The bank issued a formal notice of default last week. They are staring down the barrel of an imminent foreclosure." My breath caught. "They're losing the house?" "That's just the beginning. The luxury cars are leased, and both are in arrears. But the most alarming discovery relates to a massive capital loss. Tell me, Mrs. Parker, roughly 3 years ago, did Sarah ask you for a substantial sum of money? Specifically around $50,000? My stomach plummeted. I remembered that day perfectly. Sarah had called me, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. She said Arthur had been diagnosed with a rare aggressive heart arrhythmia. The experimental treatment wasn't covered by their premium insurance, and they needed $50,000 up front to secure his spot in the program. I had wired the money from my retirement account, terrified I was going to lose my son-in-law. "Yes," I whispered, feeling the bile rise in my throat. "She said it was for a life-saving medical treatment for Arthur's heart." David let out a harsh breath. "Evelyn, I pulled the SEC filings and public court dockets. Arthur didn't have a heart condition. 3 years ago, he opened a heavily leveraged brokerage account and got involved in trading high-risk options and derivatives. The market turned on him. He didn't just lose his own money, he lost $50,000 of your money in a matter of weeks. He was issued a margin call and faced a lawsuit from the brokerage." The garden around me seemed to tilt. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just entitlement, it was a calculated sociopathic level of deception. They had weaponized my love for them, invented a fatal illness, and used my terror to cover his gambling debts. "He's broke," David continued smoothly, "completely tapped out. His credit score is abysmal. He's drowning, Evelyn. That is why he panicked when you cut off the credit card on the cruise. That card was likely floating their daily living expenses, and that is why they are coming for you this weekend. You are not their beloved mother. You are their last remaining asset. They need your house and Thomas's money to save themselves from bankruptcy." I looked at the house Thomas and I had built, the quiet, peaceful sanctuary that Arthur intended to liquidate to save his own pathetic ego. The sadness was entirely gone now. There was nothing left but cold, hard steel. "David," I said, my voice eerily calm, "they told me they are coming to Ohio this Saturday to check on me. Arthur threatened to bring someone to evaluate my mental state." "I expected as much," David replied sharply. "He'll likely bring a concierge doctor, a hired gun with a medical degree who will rubber stamp a declaration of incompetence for the right price. They'll try to intimidate you into signing a voluntary power of attorney right there in your living room. If you refuse, they'll use the doctor's note to file an emergency ex parte motion with the probate court on Monday morning. What do? We let them walk right into the trap, David said. I am sending a courier to your house tomorrow with a certified copy of the trust documents, the new power of attorney, and the financial dossier I just compiled on Arthur. I want you to invite Judge Hayes over for tea on Saturday morning. And Evelyn? Yes? Don't offer them anything to drink. J'attends. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, overcast chill that signaled the approaching autumn. Inside my house, a fire crackled in the living room hearth. The heavy mahogany coffee table was cleared of its usual magazines. In the center sat a thick black leather folder. Margaret Hayes sat in Thomas's old wingback chair, wearing a sharp charcoal blazer and sipping Earl Grey tea. She looked like an apex predator waiting patiently in the brush. Standing in the kitchen, casually leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee, was Officer Miller. He was a veteran of the local police department, a man whose children I had tutored in math 20 years ago. Margaret had called in a favor, requesting a civil standby due to a credible threat of elder intimidation and trespassing. Officer Miller had gladly obliged, pulling his squad car out of sight behind my detached garage. At exactly 10 a.m., a black Uber pulled into the driveway. They couldn't even afford to fly. The timeline meant they had likely driven through the night from Chicago in one of their leased cars, taking an Uber for the last mile so I wouldn't see the vehicle. I watched through the sheer curtains. Arthur stepped out first, wearing a crisp suit, looking every inch the concerned executive. Sarah followed, wearing a beige cashmere sweater, her face drawn and tight. Behind them stepped a third man, middle-aged, carrying a leather briefcase, looking decidedly uncomfortable. The hired gun. "Showtime, Evelyn," Margaret murmured, setting her teacup down. I walked to the front door and opened it before they could knock. "Mom!" Sarah gasped, stepping forward with her arms outstretched, performing the role of the desperate, loving daughter perfectly. I didn't step back, but I held up a hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Sarah, Arthur, come in." They stepped into the foyer. The third man followed awkwardly. "Evelyn, it's good to see you," Arthur said, his voice dripping with heavy, condescending sympathy. "This is Dr. Evans. He's a specialist from Chicago. We brought him down because, well, we've been very worried about you since the cruise." "Have you?" I asked neutrally. "Let's go into the living room." As we walked into the living room, Arthur and Sarah both froze. Margaret remained seated in the wingback chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her sharp eyes fixing them with a terrifying intensity. "Who is this?" Arthur demanded, his polite facade cracking slightly. "I'm a friend of Evelyn's," Margaret said smoothly, not offering her hand. "You may proceed, Mr. Mitchell. Don't let me interrupt your medical intervention." Arthur looked at Sarah, a flicker of panic in his eyes, but his arrogance quickly overrode it. He turned back to me, adopting a tone of forced patience. "Evelyn, we don't need an audience for this. This is a private family matter. Whatever you have to say to me, Arthur, you can say in front of Margaret. Or you can leave." Arthur's jaw tightened. He gestured to the man with the briefcase. "Fine. Mom, Dr. Evans is a neuropsychiatrist. After your erratic behavior, closing accounts, hiding on the ship, cutting off contact, we consulted with him. We believe the grief of Thomas's death has triggered early-onset cognitive decline. Dr. Evans is here to do a brief, painless evaluation to get you the help you need." Dr. Evans cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at me. "Mrs. Parker, I just have a few standard questions. You are not licensed to practice medicine in the state of Ohio, Dr. Evans." Margaret's voice cut through the room like a whip, which means any medical evaluation you conduct across state lines for the purpose of a legal proceeding is a violation of the Medical Board's ethics code. Should I make a phone call to the Illinois Medical Board right now, or would you like to pack up your little briefcase and wait outside? Dr. Evans turned pale. He looked at Arthur, then at Margaret's icy, unwavering glare. Without a single word, he turned on his heel and practically sprinted out the front door, the latch clicking shut behind him. The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur's face flushed a dark, angry crimson. "What the hell is this, Evelyn? Who is this woman?" "That woman," I said, stepping forward, "is the Honorable Margaret Hayes, retired presiding judge of the Cuyahoga County Probate Court, and she is the primary agent on my newly executed medical and financial power of attorney." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mom, what have you done?" "I protected myself," I said calmly. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the black leather folder. I dropped it onto the glass surface directly in front of Arthur. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. You see, Arthur, when you threatened to have me declared incompetent and seize my assets, I had my lawyer look into why you were so desperate. I thought maybe it was just greed. I didn't realize it was survival. I opened the folder. The first page was the bank's notice of default on their Chicago mansion. 90 days past due on the first and second mortgage, Arthur? I asked, watching his eyes widen in absolute horror as he saw the document. Foreclosure proceedings starting next week? Mom, please, you don't understand. Sarah started to cry, stepping toward me. Don't touch me, I snapped, the authority in my voice freezing her in place. I turned the page. And this is my favorite. $50,000, Sarah. You sat in my kitchen and cried about Arthur's heart condition. You let me believe my son-in-law was dying. I pulled out the SEC filing and the brokerage lawsuit, holding it up. Derivatives, options trading. You used my terror, my love for you, to cover a gambling debt. That's a lie, Arthur shouted, stepping toward me, his fists clenched. That data is illegally obtained. You crazy old bitch, I'll sue you for— You won't sue anyone, Mr. Mitchell, a deep voice boomed from the hallway. Arthur spun around. Officer Miller stepped into the living room, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. The sight of the uniform instantly drained the remaining color from Arthur's face. Officer Miller is here to ensure a peaceful resolution to this trespassing incident, I said softly. I looked at Sarah. She was weeping openly now, her mascara running down her cheeks, the perfectly curated facade shattered into a million pieces. She looked small, pathetic, and entirely broken. For a brief second, the ghost of the mother I used to be wanted to reach out and comfort her. But the woman I was now simply felt a profound, exhausting pity. You came here today to steal my house and lock me away, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of 5 years of betrayal. But you are too late. As of Wednesday, this house, my bank accounts, and Thomas's $500,000 life insurance policy that you never knew about have been transferred into an irrevocable living trust. I own nothing in my name. You cannot sue me. You cannot commit me. There is not a single penny left for you to take. Arthur stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The reality of his situation, the impending bankruptcy, the foreclosure, the absolute failure of his master plan, was crashing down on him all at once. Mom, please, Sarah sobbed, dropping to her knees on the Persian rug. We're going to lose everything. We'll be homeless. What about Chloe? What about Noah? You can't do this to your grandchildren. Please, I'm begging you. Help us. The manipulation was instinctual. Even now, stripped bare, she reached for the only weapon she had left. The kids. I am not doing this to you, Sarah, I said gently, though my heart ached at the mention of my grandchildren. You did this to yourselves. I was your mother, not your bank. And you chose to treat me like a machine. I looked at Officer Miller. I would like these people removed from my property. They are no longer welcome here. If they return, I want them arrested for trespassing. You heard the lady, Officer Miller said, stepping forward and gesturing toward the door. Time to go, folks. Move it. Arthur didn't say another word. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He looked hollowed out, utterly defeated by the very woman he had dismissed as a weak, gullible mark. He turned and walked out the door, not even waiting for his wife. Sarah stayed on the floor for a moment longer, looking up at me through tear-soaked eyes. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the unconditional, foolish love to override my common sense. I just looked back at her. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I just let her see the absolute emptiness where my enabling used to be. Slowly, she got up. She didn't say goodbye. She walked out the door, her shoulders slumped, her designer sweater looking suddenly cheap and worn. When the door finally clicked shut and the sound of the Uber pulling away faded down the street, the silence returned to the house. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Margaret stood up, brushing a non-existent piece of lint from her blazer. She walked over to the coffee table, closed the black leather folder, and handed it to me. Well done, Evelyn, she said softly. Thomas would be very, very proud of you. I took the folder, feeling the solid weight of it in my hands. I looked around the beautiful, quiet room that belonged to me and only me. Yes, I smiled. the first genuine smile I had felt in years. I think he would be. The fallout from that Saturday morning was swift and absolute. I didn't have to hire a private investigator to know what happened next. In the tight-knit, image-obsessed circles of the Chicago suburbs, bad news travels faster than a prairie fire. By Thanksgiving, Arthur's brokerage lawsuit became public knowledge. His firm, a company built entirely on the illusion of financial stability, unceremoniously fired him. The bank foreclosed on their sprawling mansion just a week before Christmas. They were forced to sell the leased Lexus and the Mercedes back to the dealership at a massive penalty, and the country club quietly revoked their membership. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that they had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a struggling neighborhood. Sarah had been forced to take a job as a receptionist at a dental office, her first actual job in 15 years. I felt no malicious joy in their downfall. I didn't celebrate. But as the winter snow began to fall over Ohio, I realized something incredibly liberating. I also felt absolutely no guilt. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing its own ledgers. I had spent 5 years absorbing the consequences of their choices. Now, for the first time in their adult lives, Arthur and Sarah were finally experiencing the weight of their own actions. With the ghosts of the past finally laid to rest, the large house in Ohio suddenly felt too big, too empty, and too anchored to a life I was no longer living. So I did something I had always dreamed of doing, something Thomas and I had talked about but never dared to execute. I sold the house. I packed up 40 years of memories, said a tearful, heartfelt goodbye to Margaret, and bought a beautiful, light-filled condo in Naples, Florida. It had a wraparound lanai overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, where the salty breeze blew warm all year round. My life transformed. I joined a local watercolor society, painting vibrant seascapes that were miles away from the muddy, anxious messes I used to paint in Ohio. I made friends, real friends, women who had lived through their own wars and come out the other side. I volunteered at the local hospital, rocking premature babies in the NICU. I was 77 years old, and for the very first time, my life belonged entirely to me. I thought the story ended there. I thought I had made my peace with losing my daughter, and by extension, my grandchildren. It was the heavy price of my freedom. But life, as I have learned, rarely closes a chapter without opening a window. It was a warm Tuesday evening, exactly 14 months after the confrontation in Ohio. I was sitting on my lanai, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of violet and gold. A glass of iced tea rested on the table next to my easel. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, expecting a neighbor dropping off a misdelivered package. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Standing on my welcome mat was a teenage girl. She was wearing faded jeans, a worn denim jacket, and a heavy, overstuffed canvas backpack that looked like it weighed almost as much as she did. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her face was pale, streaked with the unmistakable tracks of dried tears. I froze. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. "Grandma?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling, cracking with exhaustion. "Chloe?" I breathed. My granddaughter was 16 now. She was taller, her face having lost the round softness of childhood, replaced by the sharp, defensive angles of a young woman who had seen too much. How did you get here?" I asked, my hands hovering in the air, not sure if I was allowed to touch her. "Where are your parents?" "I took a Greyhound bus," Chloe said, her voice dropping into a raspy whisper. "It took 3 days. I used the money I saved from my tutoring job." She looked down at her battered sneakers. "They don't know I'm here. I left a note." Before I could even process the words, instinct took over. I reached out, grabbed her by the shoulders, and pulled her into the apartment, locking the door firmly behind her. The moment my arms wrapped around her, the stiff, defensive posture collapsed. Chloe buried her face in my shoulder and began to sob. It wasn't the manipulative, performative crying of her mother. It was the deep, gut-wrenching weeping of a child who was utterly broken. I held her tightly, stroking her hair, murmuring soft words until the storm passed. I led her to the kitchen, sat her at the island, and put a plate of warm food and a glass of milk in front of her. She ate like she was starving. "Chloe, sweetheart," I finally said gently, sitting across from her. "You have to tell me what's going on. Why did you run away?" She stopped eating, staring at the polished granite countertop. "It's bad, Grandma," she said quietly. "It's really bad at home. Dad drinks all the time now. He just sits on the couch and yells at the TV. Mom cries every day, but the second someone she knows walks into the dental office, she puts on this fake, terrifying smile and acts like everything is perfect. They fight constantly, and the things they say to each other, she shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. They blame you, you know, Chloe continued, looking up at me with Thomas's dark, intelligent eyes. They told me and Noah that you went crazy, that you stole our college money, and that you ruined our lives. The familiar sting of my daughter's poison pricked my heart, but I kept my voice steady. And do you believe them? Chloe reached into the front pocket of her denim jacket. She pulled out a folded, crumpled piece of paper and slid it across the island. I was looking for my birth certificate for a part-time job application, she explained. I found a box of Dad's old papers hidden in the closet. I found the foreclosure notices. I found the lawsuit from the brokerage firm. And I found the letters from your lawyer. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with a maturity that broke my heart. I know what they did to you, Grandma. I know they lied. I know they used you. And I know they tried to have you locked up so they could take your house. A tear slipped down her cheek. I can't live there anymore. I can't breathe in that apartment. It's built on lies. I don't want to end up like my mother. I don't want to live a fake life. She took a deep breath, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. I want to go to the community college here. I can get a job. I can pay rent. I promise I won't ask you for anything, Grandma. I just want a real family. Please, don't send me back. I looked at the young woman sitting across from me. Sarah and Arthur had tried to weaponize this child against me. They had tried to use the threat of losing her to extort me. And yet, here she was. She had sifted through the ashes of her parents' deception and found her own way to the truth. She had Thomas's integrity. She had my resilience. I reached across the island and covered her shaking, cold hands with my own. You don't ever have to pay rent in this house, Chloe, I said, my voice thick with emotion, and you are never going back to that apartment. You are home. Chloe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and squeezed my hands so tightly it hurt. The next morning I called my bulldog of a lawyer, David Vance. We arranged an emergency temporary guardianship. Sarah and Arthur, drowning in their own misery and terrified of further legal exposure regarding their past fraud, didn't even put up a fight. They signed the papers electronically within 24 hours. That was 2 years ago. Today, Chloe is a straight-A student at the local college, majoring in psychology. The dark circles under her eyes are gone, replaced by a deep, beautiful tan and a quick, genuine smile. We paint together on the lanai. We walk the beach at sunrise. We have built a family not out of obligation, and certainly not out of money, but out of mutual respect and truth. Noah, now 12, has started calling me again, and we are slowly, carefully building a bridge for him, too. I lost a daughter, yes. The grief of that will always be a quiet shadow in my heart. But by standing up for myself, by refusing to be a victim, I broke a generational cycle of manipulation. I saved myself, and in doing so, I was able to save my granddaughter. So what did I learn from all of this? I learned that love without boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. I learned that family is not a magic word that excuses abuse, theft, or disrespect. And most importantly, I learned that it is never, ever too late to rewrite the ending of your own story. If you are a woman watching this, and you feel like you are being drained dry by the people who are supposed to love you, hear me now. You do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Your money is yours. Your peace is yours. Your life is yours. Protect it. Fight for it. Because you are worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. If my journey resonated with you, please share this video. There is a woman out there right now sitting in the dark, wondering if she has the strength to say no. Let's show her that she does. Stand tall, ladies, and take your power back.